Okay, we're going to get started. There are a couple of people missing, and I got a note that someone had trouble getting on, but we'll get going here. Um, if you're muted, that's fine, but if you want to ask a question, unmute yourself, please. All right. And I appreciate your doing this with me. Nothing serious, but I just am not, as I said, but you can't hear me, Conrad? Anybody else not hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, Conrad, I think you have a problem there. Check and see. No, I'm not muted. So, all right. Okay, we will probably keep it a little on the shorter side tonight because of various things. Uh, okay, so we'll start with this week's Torah portion. Interestingly enough, it's strangely entitled Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. The reason I say it's strangely titled, but first of all, generally speaking, the title of a portion comes from one of the opening words, one of the opening lines of the Sedra, and that's exactly how this week's Torah portion begins by telling us this is the life of Sarah, and then she dies. So essentially, it's giving us a summary of the life of Sarah. Dies at 127 years of age, and we have about her burial. And since there's a need for a location, Abraham has to find a burial site, and so he goes to his local neighbors and is a kever machpelah, a cave that is in Machpelah, and this becomes the burial place for the patriarchs and most of the matriarchs this in the city of Hebron. And if you go to Hebron today, there's a large mosque that is said to be built above the burial caves where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried. Rivka is not buried in Kever Machpelah. And so now, once Sarah is out of the picture, Abraham realizes it's time for Isaac to find a wife. He's already just about 40 years of age. And so he has to make arrangements. He sends his trusted servant, who actually is not mentioned by name in the Torah portion, but is assumed by everyone to referring to, excuse me, to his servant Eliezer. And he loads up his camels and heads off to where Abraham told him to go, back to the old homestead, the whole area where Abraham came from, because Abraham makes him promise to find him a wife from his family. So when he gets to Haran, and he goes to a well outside of the town, and he makes a deal with God. He says, "If you still, Conrad, I don't know. I don't know. Everybody else can hear me, so I'm not sure what's your. Try signing on again. Get off and then sign on again, Conrad." Uh, it's not going to work. All right, guys, I'll be back with you in a minute. All right, what's that?
Yeah.
How do we do this? Anthony. All right, how am I gonna? All right. Conrad, try signing on and off again. Conrad. See, chat.
Here we go.
Hello.
Hello.
In my notebook.
Oh, sorry. Here we go.
Down, grab it.
And let me move this.
All right. Okay, so anyway, I was saying, so what the servant does, as he says, okay. He tells, says to God, the girl who comes and offers to give water to me and to my camels, that's the one who you have determined shall be the wife for Isaac. The idea being that, remember, Abraham and Sarah bring in strangers. They're happy to host people. And so the proper replacement for Sarah would be a woman who also would be prepared to bring in strangers, bring in people to her home. And so that's what transpires. And the girl comes out and she indeed offers to do that. And this is Rachel, who is the daughter of Abraham's brother and uncle. And so they are destined for each other. And I want to point out that there is a basic theme that appears a number of times in the biblical stories about finding a spouse. We have the servant finding a spouse for Isaac at the well, the watering place. When Jacob flees in a couple of weeks and he goes to a watering spot, again, and this time that's where he finds Rachel. When Moses is running away from Egypt, and we have a story where he goes to a watering hole and helps the ladies out who are there. So it seems like the watering hole was the ancient equivalent of the singles bar. So I don't know if it really was the single scene or not, but that reappears a number of times in the biblical account. Okay. So we then have the servant make a deal with Rebecca's family. She goes back and she marries Isaac. And then not long after, we're told about the death of Ishmael. We're told about the death of Abraham, first Abraham, then Ishmael, and the lineage of Ishmael's family. And then, of course, we're going to turn to the story of Isaac. The Torah and other books in the Bible, frequently when the storyline for a particular figure is over and done with, gets killed off. I say that because it says that Abraham dies, and not until next week will we read the story about the birth of Jacob and Esau. And it sounds like Abraham was dead and buried before then. But when you read and check the chronology, you discover that Abraham doesn't die until the boys are 15 years of age. But since Abraham is no longer needed for the story, basically summarizes life and moves him off stage. Maybe they didn't want to pay too many actors to be on stage at the same time. I don't know. Okay? So that's the basic story that we have in this week's Torah portion. And the idea of continuity, of looking for the proper spouse, all these figure in that story. I'm going to go straight to Kashrut. I said we would do Hebrew, but because of circumstances, we're going to have to wait till next week. I should be 100% by then, and then we'll be able to do it. So we're supposed to be talking now about Kashrut. We know that amongst the things that made it most difficult in the ancient world for people to convert to Judaism, one of those areas was the area of Kashrut, of having to rule your life in a certain way about what you can eat. Now, I want to start with a very basic premise, and that is there is no true logical reason that we can discern with the laws of Kashrut. There is no reason why a cow is kosher and a horse is not. There's no reason in and of itself. I don't think there's anything necessarily nicer about a cow or about a horse. You're closer to your horse or your cow, I don't know. So intrinsically, there's nothing there to say why the cow is kosher and why the horse is not, why fish can be kosher and why snakes cannot. But the Torah sets up a rule of how we are supposed to eat, how we're supposed to live our lives in everything we do. And a point that I try to make frequently is that I believe that the laws of the Torah are meant to make us into something different. We are animals on a basic level. We eat, we drink, we have to have offspring. And if that's all we did, we're no different from all the other animals out there in the world. But what Judaism does is says how you eat, what you eat, when you eat. Those are going to be things that you can distinguish. By making those distinguishing acts, one, we distinguish ourselves from the other living creatures. Animals have certain things they eat, they don't eat, but it's not because they say on some level, I don't want to eat this, or I want to eat this. That's their nature. Human beings can eat virtually anything. And it is by an artificial distinction that we decide what we can and cannot eat. I mean, you go around town here in Toronto, not too many people eat horse meat. Other parts of the world, they eat horse meat. We don't drink camel's milk in the Jewish religion. Other peoples do drink camel's milk or mare's milk and all kinds of other things. So the Torah, by limiting what we can eat, gives us the discipline to make a distinction between us and the animal world. Furthermore, when we follow the laws of Kashrut, we make what is a normative act, a human act, an animal act, into an act of worship, into an act of sanctity. If I say I'm going to eat this and not that, because the Torah instructs me to do that, that's an act of Kedusha. It's like an act of prayer. I am worshiping God. I am sanctifying God by what I eat. By determining that I will or will not eat something, I worship God. So I make the act of eating into an act of worship. I make a biological necessity into a religious function. Similarly with many other things, marriage, how we deal with our spouse, other things of that nature. All of those take what are really part and parcel of the normative animal world, right, and turn it into something different. Or I like to say we take an animal and we turn it into a mensch. Mensch is the Yiddish word for a person, a real good person. So we are not just animals. We are mensches. We are human beings. We are servants of God by what we eat. So let's understand that. We know that a kosher diet does not necessarily make you any healthier or less healthy. If you don't want to eat meat, there's no requirement to eat meat. If you want to be a vegetarian, that's certainly a possibility. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we want to eat meat, then we have rules and regulations. If we want to eat dairy, we have rules and regulations. So those are the basic ideas behind it. And there's a statement in the Talmud that essentially says, I'm paraphrasing it, don't say, I'm not going to eat pork because I don't like pork. Rather, you should say, well, I like pork. I'd love to eat pork, but what can I do? The Torah says I can't eat it. So it's not that you dislike it. You don't want it in terms of its basic being. It's that the Torah commands us to follow the rules of the Torah. Okay, Haley's here now. Okay. If you don't have your name showing on the screen, why don't you type, if you can type in your name, so that everybody knows who's here as well. So there are a few of you who have Samsung and other things. If you can possibly put your name on there, that would be nice. Help, Haley? All right. Okay. So now the Torah gives us certain rules about what we're going to eat. So now let's take with, if it's an animal, a living creature. We have in the book of Leviticus, and then also again in the book of Deuteronomy, rules and regulations dealing with the animals. So in Leviticus 11, God speaks to Moses, and Aaron tells him to speak to Israelite people. These are the creatures that you may eat from among all the land animals. Any animal that has true hoofs, with clefts through the hoofs, and that chews the cud, such you may eat. If it walks on 4 legs, walks on land, to be kosher, it must have a split hoof, cloven hoof, and it must chew its cud. Now, those 2 items clearly make it that they are pastoral animals. They don't eat other animals per se. Sheep, goats, cattle, American bison. These are all examples of kosher animals. They all have a split hoof, cloven hoof, and they all chew their cud. Now, cud is when an animal eats grass, it's very hard to digest. So ruminants chew the grass when they first eat. They swallow it, it goes into the first of the stomachs. They have several stomachs. Then they bring it back up, chew it again. That's the cud that they're chewing after it's begun the process of digestion. They're breaking it down further so that they can break down the cellulose that composes most of the grass. Right? So we're told as long as it has a split hoof and chews its cud. And then in Leviticus and Vayikra, it gives us some examples. The following, however, those that either chew the cud or have true hoofs, you shall not eat. There's some animals that chew their cud, and there are some animals that have a cloven hoof, but they don't have both of the identity markers. And so the Torah says, what are they? Well, some of these we're not really sure what they are. The first one they translate in the JPS is what it calls a shafdaman, which it says chews the cud, it has no true hoofs. And then it talks about the hare, the rabbit, though it chews the cud, it has no true hoofs, it is impure. Now, rabbits actually don't chew their cud, but they look like they are. And so that's why they are included here. Later on, all right, so those are the list of here we'll see more later in Deuteronomy. All right, so that's land animals. So the four-legged animals that walk on land, those are what we're allowed to eat, provided they have a split hoof and they chew their cud. Then in Leviticus, it goes on to say, these you may eat of all that live in water. Anything in water, whether in the seas or in the streams, that has fins and scales, these you may eat. But anything in the seas or in the streams that has no fins and scales, among all the swarming things of the water, among all the other living creatures that are in the water, they are an abomination to you, and you shall not eat of their flesh. So anything that we pull out of the water has to have fins and scales. There are some species that are very clearly not kosher. So, example, like catfish. Catfish don't have scales. Others, like sharks, their scales are such they cannot be separated from the flesh of the shark without tearing the flesh. There are some animals, some fish of the sea that have been subject to debate. One of the most notable one is the swordfish. Is swordfish kosher or not? There are some who say yes, and the majority of the Orthodox world say no. Rabbi Isaac Klein of La Shalom said he consulted with ichthyologists, and they said that when the swordfish are young, they indeed do have regular scales, but as they mature, they lose those scales. So he said they were kosher. We know that throughout Jewish history, there was a discussion of what was called in Hebrew dag ispada, which seems to be swordfish. And a lot of authorities had permitted swordfish. And a lot of authorities in Israel had permitted swordfish. But when Rabbi Isaac Klein came out with this permission to eat swordfish, a number of important Orthodox rabbis said, no, you can't eat swordfish. Most likely because he said yes, they said no. I'm sorry, but that's the reality, I think, behind it. And so even some of the rabbis in Israel who had permitted the consumption of swordfish, now they changed their mind because of this particular rabbi's push. So anyway, if you ask me, I don't eat swordfish.
To meeting.
Somebody else eats swordfish, that's fine as far as I'm concerned.
Mhm.
You consult with your rabbi. You don't have to eat swordfish. There are lots of other fish out there in the world, so that's fine. All shellfish are forbidden. Lobsters, clams, shrimp. I'll let you in on a secret. I didn't keep kosher when I was growing up. And the first time I had lobster was the last time I had lobster, because not long after that, I started keeping kosher. So I can honestly say, I don't not eat lobster because I don't like it. I liked it. Well, what can I do? The Torah says I can't eat lobster. That's it. I know people who come from Asian background, pork and shrimp and those things are big issues that you just have to deal with. But that's the reality of the laws of kashrut. Okay, so all sea mammals are forbidden. Eels are forbidden. Calamari, octopus are forbidden. There are lists in different places, and I will send you some more information online during the course of the week with some of the identification for some of the fish that are deemed to be kosher for eating. Now, in verse 13 of chapter 11 of Leviticus, we're now turns to birds. And this is one of the biggest problems because the Torah doesn't really define what makes a bird kosher. It gives us a list of non-kosher birds. And by rights, that should mean any bird that's not on this list should be kosher. However, since there's a difficulty in identifying some of these species, it became accepted tradition that we only eat those birds that were accepted by the Jewish community as being kosher birds. That there was a tradition of consuming those birds. So, for example, chicken, domesticated ducks, swans, those are into swans, geese. What we do have is a list of, as I said, of birds that are not kosher. So, as I said in Leviticus 13, it says the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the kite, falcons of every variety, all varieties of raven, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, hawks of every variety, the little owl, the cormorant, and the great owl, the white owl, the pelican, and the bustard, the stork, herons of every variety, the hoopoe, and the bat. The bat gets thrown in there because it does seem to fly around, and therefore got listed with the birds in that list. Then the Torah goes to say, all winged swarming things that walk on fours shall be an abomination for you. But these you may eat among all the winged swarming things that walk on fours, all that have above their feet jointed legs to leap with on the ground. Of these you may eat the following: locusts of every variety, all varieties of bald locusts, crickets of every variety, and all varieties of grasshoppers. All other winged swarming things that have four legs shall be an abomination to you. We know that the Jews of Yemen did have a tradition of eating grasshoppers or locusts. Last time I checked, you will not find any kosher locusts on the market in Toronto. Who knows in the future, because there are people who keep pushing that maybe we should start eating some of these things. Maybe there'll be some rabbis who will come along and permit certain locusts. I don't look forward to that happening very soon.
Crunchy.
So now, if we turn to, some people are laughing. I don't know, maybe locusts taste good. I'm told.
Tastes like chicken.
Locusts,
Oh, no.
don't worry about shechting them. We'll talk about shechita and slaughtering later on. But all right.
I think the ones in Texas are big enough to check.
Well, that was one of the questions. There's an old joke that goes around. Is a giraffe kosher?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Giraffe chews its cud, has
Mhm.
cloven hoofs, but where do you cut it? Where in the neck do you make the shechita, the slicing? That's a joke because
Yeah.
but there is in Israel what's it called? The Bible Zoo?
Hmm.
The Biblical Zoo of Jerusalem.
No, not the Biblical Zoo in Jerusalem. This is another thing that this guy put together. He's done a lot of research on zoology and the laws of Kashrut, and every year he has a fancy dinner, which you have to pay a lot of bucks for, in which they serve all kinds of specialties that you would not be able to have otherwise. And I believe he's had giraffe once on the menu. Okay. But then he has to find somebody to shecht it and everything. And we haven't, there are a lot of other things we haven't touched upon yet. Right now, we're just talking about species, not about how we handle them. Okay? So let's keep that in mind. We're just talking about species. So in Deuteronomy 14, it lists some of the kosher animals: the ox, sheep, and goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roebuck, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, the mountain sheep, and any other animal that has true hoofs which are cleft in two and brings up the cud, such you may eat. But the following which do bring up the cud or have true hoofs which are cleft through, you may not eat: the camel, the hare, the daemon, for all they bring up the cud, they have no true hoofs, so they're impure. Okay, there's a Rashi famously says the pig, which is of course the prime example of the non-kosher animal. Why it's the prime example? Because a pig lies down, it puts its 2 feet in front, it lies down like this, and it's showing its cloven hoof. It says, look, I have a cloven hoof, you can eat me. All right. So, but of course it doesn't chew its cud, so therefore we can't eat the pig. All right. There is no basis for claiming that the reason we cannot consume pork is because of trichinosis. Right? That nowhere does the Torah say you cannot eat pig because you might get sick. Nor does it say you can't eat shellfish because there might be some kind of disease. It doesn't say you can't eat a horse but because it doesn't move. These are not given. There, all right. So, and I'll come back to that later. All right. So, we have these examples. When it comes to the water, again, it doesn't give examples. And of the birds, once again, it gives examples of things that you may not eat. All right. So we've started off, well, these are in the zoological world, these are the animals that are kosher for consumption. Anything that comes from them, that any of the non-kosher animals, we may not consume. For example, you can't have pig's milk. You can't have milk from a horse or a camel. All right? So that we have to understand, all right? If the animal is kosher, then those things that come from it should be kosher. Now, at the end of this list in Deuteronomy and in other places, there's an extra bit added, and that is, where is it? You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. What that simply says, if I have a goat, because that's the nomenclature, but any animal that's mammalian, that's kosher, produces milk, I may not cook that animal in its own mother's milk. Now, if that's all we had and we didn't have rabbinic tradition, we might say, well, how likely is it going to be that that steak that you bought in the grocery store and that bottle of milk that you bought are related to each other directly? Mm-hmm. So it says 3 times in the Torah, Lo tavashel gedi b'chalev imo, do not cook, the kid in its mother's milk. And so the joke goes that God says to Moshe, do not cook a kid in his mother's milk. So Moses says, okay, that means therefore we cannot eat milk with the meat. God says, I told you not to cook it in its mother's milk. Oh, that means you can't have benefit from an animal that's been cooked in its mother's milk. And so we can't eat it, consume it. We can't have benefit from it in any way. We may not cook it at all. So there are 3 things. God said to Moses, okay, forget it already. Do what you want. Right? But we may not cook meat and milk together. We may not consume meat and dairy products together. We may not have any benefit from meat and milk that has been cooked together. Okay. So we will talk about that when we talk about spilling milk in our beef soup a little bit later. All right. So now we've got species. We have a restriction for mammalian creatures. We cannot mix dairy products with their flesh in any way, cooking, consuming, making any use of it, of that cooked meat. What's not stated are fowl or fish. And there is clearly stated in the Talmud, there was one rabbinic authority that in his community back in the early days, he permitted the consumption of dairy products with fowl. All right? So you could, was it the chicken cordon bleu? Is that made with cheese or something?
Yeah.
However, the majority of rabbis disagreed with him. And so in his community, it was permitted. Everywhere else, it was not. And then that has become the accepted standard rule that we do not mix dairy and meat products in any way with fowl, just as we do not mix them with mammals. Now, when it comes to fish, there's no milk involved with fish. So the consumption of fish with dairy products is permitted.
What's the differentiator between that and chicken? Because with fowl, there's no milk either.
Well, it's a good question. The only answer I can give is that we tend to put chicken in the same categories as meat, right? If you know vegetarians, there are some vegetarians who will eat fish. You know, they're fish, what they call pescatarians. They will still eat fish because they find something different about a fish. Just like when it comes to slaughtering an animal, we have specific rules on how we have to slaughter fowl and cattle. There are no rules about slaughtering fish. And so if you take a fish out of water after a little short period of time, it's going to die. So people generally, I think, put chicken into the same box with meat. That's the only answer I can give you. And the fear was that if you ate chicken with dairy, you might then make the mistake and eat meat with dairy. All right. But that has become the standard rule of kashrut. You know, as I've mentioned before, Judaism, like all traditional religions, is very conservative, small letter C. And once something becomes established, you don't change it very easily. Okay? So once it became standard accepted, you will not be considered to be keeping kosher if you have your chicken burger with a slice of cheese. Okay? But if you want a fish sandwich with cheese and fish, that you can do. Is there a question? Oh, okay. You can always wave the hand that's on the screen if you don't want to show your face, or raise your own hand if you've got a question. And please don't hesitate if you don't understand something. All right. So we have a separation of dairy products, and we have a separation of meat and fowl from dairy. Fish you can consume with dairy. As I've alluded to, there was no strict rule about slaughtering fish, but there very clearly is a rule when it comes to animals. We're not allowed to eat the blood of an animal, because it says it is in the blood is the life of the animal. All right. We can't live without blood. The Torah says, do not consume the two together. So when cattle, sheep, goats are slaughtered, they have to be slaughtered in a specific manner. They are slaughtered by using a knife that's big enough and sharp enough that it can sever the two simanim, the carotid artery and the esophagus. And when that takes place, the blood flow to the brain is cut off almost immediately, and the animal dies within a few seconds. And that is the standard rule for kosher slaughtering. Now, in today's world, there's sometimes some issues in that because some people are not comfortable with that methodology of slaughtering of animals. Dairy cattle are often killed first either by electric stunning, or by shooting them in the head with some kind of device. Neither one of those are accepted for kashrut slaughter, kosher slaughter. And by slaughtering it by the neck, across the neck, that allows the blood to flow out as quickly as possible. Similarly with fowl, we do the same kind of slaughter for the neck and allow the blood to flow out. You may see some videos that are around on YouTube and others put out by PETA and other organizations that show animals kicking around and seemingly moving after they have undergone the ritual slaughter. That is basically just the nerves reacting. The animal is dead, but the body itself is not quite aware of it completely, the nerve system. Once the animal has been slaughtered, we have to remove as much blood as possible from the body. That is done by salting and rinsing the meat. The meat is salted to help draw out the blood, and it's rinsed off to remove any of the blood that's there. Once you've gone through the process of salting and soaking and salting, there will be no blood that is considered to be the blood of the animal. The norm, that is the blood that we're forbidden to eat.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
So I know that there's like a prohibition on killing animals in vain, like Tzar B'alei Chaim. So what makes it, like, if there are other food sources, what makes eating them not that?
Because the Torah says we're allowed to. It doesn't say you must. Okay. If you choose to eat meat, then there are certain prescriptions. If you don't choose to eat meat, that's fine too. Okay. Very famously, Rabbi Isaac Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of what was then known as Palestine, was known to have been a vegetarian. But he does not insist that one be that way. The Tzar B'alei Chaim, there are lots of things that involve with that. And for example, I do not eat veal. Veal is because the animal is kept in a very closed container. It can't move around. It's not really a good thing as far as I'm concerned. So I and my family do not consume veal because of Tzar B'alei Chaim.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So usually what happens is today's world, the animal is cut up, and why did this pop up? We're already meeting. All right. I lost my train of thought there. All right. Some people look at other aspects of agribusiness and have some difficulties with some of the things that are done to raise chickens and to have eggs and everything. And that is certainly worth thinking about. And I don't doubt that given another 100 to 200 years, we will not be consuming animal flesh. And most likely not because of moral convictions, but because it just will not make sense in terms of the economics of the world in which we live. And so we'll all be eating meat that comes out of a test tube, whatever you want to call it. Mhm.
Speak.
Schmeat.
Schmeat. Is that what it's called? Yeah, almost meat.
I
Next,
think there's a question in the chat.
yeah. There's a question.
I think it had something to do with eggs.
Okay. If you went to a farm and you harvested you go to the chicken coop and you take an egg out of the nest. How old is that egg? Was that egg fertilized?
Mhm.
If the egg has started to develop into a chick,
You need it.
you cannot eat it because now it's already gone to the next stage.
Yeah.
All right? As long as it is not yet developed into a chick, which is the case really all of our, I'll come back to all the eggs we have today. Also, once it's been laid, if the egg is still inside the bird, it's regarded as part of the bird and therefore it's regarded as meat. If it has been laid and it's not fertilized, it's regarded as something entirely different, and it comes under the category we say parv, neither meat nor dairy. We have to talk about parv and the classifications later. Really, it's a stringency today to check your eggs when you crack them open to make an scrambled egg or what have you. Right? Because all the eggs that, well, it depends upon, I guess, where you buy your eggs. But if you go to any grocery store, you're not going to find fertilized eggs in the grocery store. So any seeming blood spot is not a real blood spot in accordance with that ruling. However, many people are stringent not to eat an egg if they see there's a blood spot on it. And that's why when we hard cook eggs, we're supposed to always cook at least 3 together. The likelihood of more than one of them having a blood spot is very, very small. And so 2 outweigh the 1. I'll explain that later. So that if one had a blood spot, when you've hard cooked it, hard boiled it, you can't see that there was a blood spot on it. So when it comes to nullifying something, when it's solids, it's as long as a greater amount of one part is greater than the other, it makes it okay. Hold on to that till later on. Okay, answer the question. Okay. So now, besides the fact that we have to salt the meat and get all the blood out of it, there are certain fats in the animal, especially in the hindquarters, as well as what is called the sciatic nerve. In a couple of weeks, we'll read the story of Jacob wrestling with an angel. And in that story, it says that the angel touches Jacob's thigh and his leg goes out of joint or something like that. And that's said to be the sciatic nerve. And so we are told there from then on, the children of Israel did not consume the sciatic nerve. Now, the problem is that the sciatic nerve runs through the hindquarters of cattle, sheep, goats, runs through some of the choicest cuts of meat. In order to remove it, the person who has the expertise in doing it has to cut through a lot of the good cuts of meat. And so in North America, economically, it's just not worthwhile to do what we call trevor. The hindquarters, remove the forbidden fats and sciatic nerve. Therefore, you do not find in North America in general, there may be a few exceptions, but in general, you will not find the fine cuts that come from the hindquarters of the cow. The hindquarters go to a non-kosher line. We only use the front half, the front 2/4 of a cow for consumption. Similarly with sheep and goats. I've never seen goat meat around, but I've had sheep and then lambs. Okay. Chickens also have certain veins that are removed, as well as the salting. Now, it used to be that you would go to the butcher shop, and when you buy your chicken or you would buy your meat, the person dealing with it at home would have to soak it and drain drain the blood from it. Today, everything that you find in the grocery store and at the kosher butcher will already have been salted, so that you don't have to worry about that today. When I first got married, we had to deal with that a little bit. Today, we don't have to worry about that at all. Okay? So when it comes to beef, comes to chickens, they must be slaughtered by what is called in Hebrew a shochet. Shchita, lishchot, means to slaughter. A shochet is a ritual slaughter. The ritual slaughter must know the rules, must examine the animal, be sure that there are no indications that the animal was sick in accordance with Jewish law, which means, for example, no holes in lungs or no holes or penetrations in the stomach lining. If it has that, then the animal is not considered to be kosher. If an animal had certain adhesions on the lungs, it used to be that the kosher trade would remove those adhesions, and if they saw there was no hole underneath it, it was regarded as being kosher. Sephardim never accepted that. They had to have no indication whatsoever, no adhesions. And it became eventually the accepted ruling for most kosher manufacture today, that everything must be what is called glatt kosher. Glatt's from Yiddish meaning smooth. The lungs are smooth. There are no adhesions whatsoever to worry about. And so the word glatt really is only a reference to beef and sheep, goats. You will find those signs that say this is a glatt kosher chicken. There's no such thing. Or glatt kosher dairy, which is a what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it doesn't mean anything, absolutely nothing. Oxymoron. You can't have glatt kosher dairy because you can't have meat that's with dairy. Right? But it has now become accepted that glatt means super kosher.
Yeah.
Okay? So a lot of places will say their place is glatt kosher, meaning it is super kosher. Right? Now, when it comes to dairy products, the Talmud was very much concerned that in their day and age, if you didn't own your own cattle, didn't milk your own goat, you went to your neighbor to buy milk. And your neighbor may have horses, mares, and camels, and sows, and whatever around. And could you be sure that they didn't mix some other kind of milk in with the cow's milk? So unless there was somebody Jewish supervising the milking of that animal, Jews would not use that milk. And is known today in the trade as Chalav Yisrael. Back in the 30s, one of the foremost authorities in North America, Orthodox rabbinate, Rav Moshe Feinstein, basically said, yeah, it's better to have Chalav Yisrael, milk that was supervised from the very milking of the animal, but because of the rules and regulations that you find in the Food and Dairy Administration in the States, similarly in Canada, that if you say something is milk, cow's milk, it must be 100% cow's milk. And you're more likely to suffer greater problems if you mixed some other thing into your cow's milk than losing your kosher certification. He says, if you have to, you can rely on it. And many, many people today do rely on using milk that is just general, go to the grocery store and buy a normal container of milk. Others insist upon Chalav Yisrael, and more that's becoming a standard in many dairy restaurants. In Toronto, I'm not sure there's any dairy restaurants today in Toronto that don't have a sign saying they use only Chalav Yisrael. Okay? So be that as it may. Cheese is produced by the addition of rennet. Rennet is an enzyme found in the stomach lining of calves. And there's a whole to-do about how you can make cheese and what the source of the rennet and how it's done. So today, all kosher cheese is produced by using some kind of artificial rennet. They don't use rennet that comes from an animal. Sometimes there are fish rennets that is used. That's the coagulant to making it to turn from milk into cheese. So kosher cheese will have supervision to make sure that the rennet that is being used is rennet that is permissible to be used in the manufacture of kosher cheese. Again, there were some in the conservative movement, Rabbi Klein again, although I tend to disagree with him, but who am I to disagree with Rabbi Klein, who permitted basic cheeses that are out there in North America because of how they're manufactured. You speak to your rabbi about what they say about whether or not you have to have cheese with rabbinic supervision. Okay? Butter is the same category as the milk, but cheese has that issues of rennet. And once any kind of manufacturing goes on it, then you have to worry about other additives. All right, so we have the animals that we can eat. If it's cattle or fowl, they must be slaughtered properly. They must be salted, rinsed and salted to remove all of the blood. Any forbidden fats have to be removed from the meat. If it's fish, you have to be sure what fish it is. That's not always so simple. There was a big to-do. There are a lot of restaurants, apparently, that were substituting catfish for another popular fish. I don't know, maybe trout. I don't know what they were substituting it for. But people would go to, we're not talking about kosher restaurants right now, non-kosher restaurants, thinking they were getting this particular fish, and instead they were getting catfish. So in order to make sure that you are getting kosher fish, you either go to a kosher store. For example, Sobeys has a kosher fish section with fresh fish. Or you go and you see the fish with its skin that you can identify as being a kosher fish, and preferably using a kosher knife, trim that fish. If it's frozen fish, if it's kosher, they will have kosher symbols. If it's not kosher, it's not a symbol, you run into the problem substituting one fish for another. There are a lot of people out there who've done that. The kosher trades that's done that as well. We'll talk in a moment about that. So when it comes to fish, you also need to be aware that it's a kosher variety of fish, species of fish, and that it is clearly marked, labeled in such a way that you have no concern. the Talmud forbids the consumption of meat with fish. Now, we don't really understand why. There are attempts to come up with answers. Some say it was because they thought somehow that leprosy was related to eating fish and meat together. Others said because of the bones that you can find in fish. And if you're eating meat and the fish together, you might have a problem. So standard operating procedure in most kosher homes in Philly is we don't have meat and fish together. We have them separate plates, separate utensils. We don't have to wait a period of time after consuming meat before having fish or vice versa. But we avoid having them together at the same time. Okay. So those are our species. Those are our mixing. And I will send to you in the mail some samples of what are called hechshers. A hechsher is a symbol that says that an item is kosher. It's not simply the letter K. Anybody can put the letter K in a product and claim it's kosher. These are all symbols that have are registered trademarks. And if anybody uses it without permission, they can be sued by the holder of the trademark. And therefore, that's how the kosher consumer can rely that the product was under proper rabbinic supervision and they can eat it. There are all kinds of hechshers out there in the world. Some people will use most of them, some will only use some of them, some will only use their own rabbis. The kosher world is an interesting world and sometimes very cutthroat and in not very nice ways. Okay? It's a very valuable business. A lot of non-Jews look for kosher symbols. They think for some reason that it makes the product better. There was Hebrew National Hot Dogs used to advertise that they were kosher and they had to answer to a higher authority for the quality of their hot dog. Well, I don't know if that was true about the quality, but they had their kosher symbol back in the day. So don't mix your dairy in your meat. Don't mix your fish in your meat. If you have supervised grasshoppers that are listed as being kosher, you can eat them with either. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you put it in a milk chocolate, you can't eat it with your meat. Okay. All right. What can I tell you? All right. Now, one other thing when it comes to meat and dairy. We know as a reality that it takes a lot longer to digest meat than it does to digest dairy products. And since we're not supposed to consume them together, what constitutes consuming them together? Now, the Talmud never truly defines that. The assumption was that since meat takes longer to digest, the Talmud says you can't eat after you've consumed meat, you cannot consume dairy till your next meal. But how long is it from your one meal to the next? Depends on your local custom. Some people eat lunch at noon and dinner at 6 or 7. Some eat lunch at noon and then have tea time at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock, whatever tea time is. So there are different customs. Sephardim and most Ashkenazi Jews wait 6 hours after consuming meat before consuming dairy. German Jews followed a custom of 3 hours. after they ate meat, they would not consume dairy for 3 hours. And my understanding is Dutch Jews had the tradition of 72 minutes. Okay? Maimonides was not so much concerned with the digestion, but he was worried that if you have a meat meal and pieces of meat get stuck in your tooth, and when you go to eat dairy, you're mixing meat and dairy together, and that's why he thought you had to have that 6-hour period between. For some, they only go cafe. What was that, Edith? Cafe Kuchen? He wrote something. Germany, they enjoy cafe Kuchen, whatever that means. Is that like a dairy
cake.
after lunch?
It's coffee cake.
Coffee cake. All right.
Yes, coffee cake.
Okay. I used to like coffee cake when I wasn't celiac. But anyway, you can, we'll talk about, I haven't come to Parv yet in general, but when I started keeping kosher, I followed the tradition that at Camp Ramah, which was a very strong tradition in conservative circles for various reasons, of 3 hours. And so that's how my children were all raised. And my oldest, they wait 6, but otherwise my children wait 3 hours. After you finish eating a meat meal and you do the benching afterwards, the Birkat Hamazon, 3 hours, and then you can consume dairy. Those who wait 6 hours, some of them only wait until the beginning of the 6th hour. In other words, 5 full hours. And once you enter into the 6th hour, then they say you can consume dairy. Now, the question is the other way. If I eat dairy, how long do I have to wait before I consume meat? And general rule of thumb for Ashkenazic Jews was, as long as you have cleaned your mouth out, rinsed your mouth out, have some water, preferably if you're having fish too, have a little shot of schnapps to clean the gullet, you can then immediately consume meat. Right? So they'll have dairy and just in a few minutes have meat. The only exception to that is when you eat something that's considered to be hard cheese. And I'm very uncertain what the definition today of hard cheese really is. I've heard the statement that Parmesan cheese is considered to be hard cheese. I'm not sure about that.
Grated.
I'm sorry?
No.
Somebody said something. But if it's a very hard cheese, hard to chew and everything like that, then it's treated the same way as you would treat meat for the waiting time. But most of the time, most of the stuff that we consume today, there's no issue of that. So we can, as long as you wait a minute or two, rinse your mouth out, have a piece of bread or something to clean your mouth out with it, then you're allowed to consume meat. Now, anything that doesn't come from an animal, except for eggs that are unfertilized, and honey, which is a special exemption, which is kind of problematic. Anything that doesn't come from an animal is called parv.
Yeah.
Parv means it's neutral. It is neither meat nor dairy, may be consumed with either meat or dairy products. So, for example, if I have a string bean, I can make string beans for my meat meal. I can make string beans for my dairy meal. If I have lettuce, or I have honey, or I have sugar, or I have almond milk, or oat milk, which is around soy milk, all of these things are not animal products, and therefore they're considered to be neutral, parv. The Talmud itself talks about almond milk. And in those days, since it was not that frequent, they insisted that if you had almond milk, you had to have almond shells on the table as a reminder to everybody that is almond milk, not cow's milk. And when non-dairy creamers first really hit the scene back in the early 60s, if they were served in restaurants, rather than putting in little containers, they would have special pitchers that would have the name of the product on it, so that when you had your coffee or your tea with milk after dinner, you would know it was Parv dairy, non-dairy creamer. And there's a famous joke, again using Rav Moshe Feinstein, that there was once this big dinner on the Lower East Side of New York, and he was having his coffee, and he reaches for one of the they have two different non-dairy creamers on the table. Picks one up, looks at it, puts it down, and then takes another one, the different brand, pours it into his coffee. The manufacturer of the first product came to him after and said, Moshe, what are you doing to me? You know it's kosher. Why wouldn't you use my milk? Everybody thinks it's no good anymore. He says, it was empty. What am I supposed to do? That's how things do happen, by the way. But in any case, even if the product says non-dairy, you have to know for a fact that it's non-dairy. So that if it's kosher, it will say non-dairy, or it'll say parv on it. Now, there's one issue that has come about and is a problem, which I have to explain more detail later. And that is, sometimes you will find a product that is parv, but will have written on it may contain milk products. Manufacturers are very worried today about being sued. So if they make products that might somehow get accidentally mixed together, they want to protect themselves. So they will say may contain dairy products when there's absolutely no reason for that fear. But some people take that as meaning it's dairy. Furthermore, there are some additives that they may not list as dairy, but for kosher purposes are considered to be dairy. Although now with all the thing about allergies and everything, maybe those products aren't being used anymore. And some were meat products, mono and diglycerides that were made from animal fats and things like that. So when you are buying something that is undergoes processing of any kind, you really should only buy it if there is a kosher symbol on it telling you that it's kosher. Because a lot of things out there may be cooked together in the same vat, or they have these big, huge, I want to call it an oven, but it's the size of a room, in which they will cook canned vegetables or such. And there may be products that aren't kosher, and some of the steam can go from one to the other conceivably, and that creates its own issues. And mixing meat and dairy and kosher and non-kosher are all things that we have to be concerned with. Okay. All right. So next week we will continue. I will talk about accidental mixings. I will talk more about dairy and meat and how to keep a kosher home. One of the things that many rabbis advise people when they're in the state of becoming Jewish and becoming kosher, that you begin by simply, if you're not kosher already, 1, don't buy non-kosher products. 2, separate your dishes and utensils. just label them in some way. So these are supposed to be meat, these are supposed to be dairy, even though they're not kosher right now. And that way, when you make a mistake, which you're going to do, you won't ruin anything. And when you're ready to have a fully kosher home, then you deal with what we'll talk about koshering next week. Okay. As I said, everything should be fine with me next week. I will have whatever I've got going on finished, and we will meet, God willing, at the synagogue. And you do know at the end of the month, we have our exam coming up. Look on your calendars, it's around the corner.
I know. It's coming. Yes.
Yeah. There are never more than 250 questions.
Oh.
I guarantee.
I
Never
have
more than
test
250.
anxiety.
Oh, no.
250.
250.
I said they're never more than that.
Right,
There may
right.
be a lot fewer than that, but there certainly won't be more than that. How's that for you? Okay, any questions?
Nope.
Okay, everybody, have a good evening.
Good night.
everybody.
Thank you so
Good
much.
night.
Fush
Thank
leibma.
you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Feel
thank
better
you.
soon. Quick and full
Thank you.
recovery. All right.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.